what's going on between my ears.
Everyone seems to be so clear,
but I'm feeling foggy. My mind is awash. Let's talk about it with Ronnie and Josh.
It's mental health awareness
month.
It's mental health awareness
Month.
It's mental health awareness month.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Judgement Seesaw. I have a special guest today, Josh Larky. He's a good friend of a lot of the people in the industry and has been a mainstay in my life in relation to fantasy football for a few years now. Lots of good insights, lots of good topics. But before we go into all that and introduce you and give you your insights, Josh, a quick note. The Judgement Seesaw as a concept comes from economics, and when applied to therapy, taps into this paradigm that we experience when communicating or observing other people. You cannot judge and be understanding simultaneously. It's literally impossible. And so you've got to pick one of the two. The Judgment Seesaw is about gauging where you are in relation to another person or a topic and what side of that seesaw you're sitting on. So Josh, welcome to the show, man. Thank you for hopping on and doing this. I'm excited to dive into all the topics, but before we get rolling, let's do a quick little plug on you and where you are right now in your fantasy career, what you're working on, and just give people a little bit of the Josh Larky experience, and then we'll dive into mental health.
That sounds good. Ronnie, we talk a lot off air. This is our second, if not third, on-air show together. I'm not quite sure. They start to blend together after a while, especially when we also just chat offline quite a bit. I'm excited to be here. In terms of what I'm doing right now, it's kind of scattered. Talking with a lot of different companies, trying to figure out the best fits for potential freelance or full-time. We'll talk about that more in depth later on in the show. But as of right now, I am committed to a weekly podcast at Player Profiler. So anyone that likes me on the mic, you get the Dominator. It's on the Player Profiler or Roto Underworld podcast feed. And I am also taking a nutrition sciences certification type course from Harvard online. So
very cool.
Yeah, I'm like 3-4 weeks into that now. So we're about like 35% of the way through that because I think health's important. And I liked that class is very much, holistic might be the right word. It's all about like, you want your diet to be good. You probably don't want to be drinking or smoking too much. I've definitely struggled in that area. You want to be exercising. You want to have positive social interactions. You want to be sleeping properly. You want to be handling your stresses properly. There's so many things like weaved into just being a healthy person that I think we don't really think about. And this course really spoke to me, and it's been very interesting. So
I love
a lot of unique stuff going on in addition to just sending out job applications, which, as we all know, is the best and worst use of time. I talk about this with a lot of people. You could apply to 20 jobs in a day. And if you don't get an interview from that, you essentially wasted your day. Or at least that's how I sometimes think about it. And that's a negative way to think about it, of course, but it's kind of the truth at the same time. So it's just, how do I kind of balance making sure that I always have something that I feel is productive each day?
Right. Well, so two things. The nutrition science course, everything you listed, ironically, is similar to what I've talked about with the previous guests, and kind of the keeping your own health and living a healthy lifestyle is often like the key ingredient to having a healthy mental state. And then also just a note, man, on the job search front, I don't think it's a failure. I actually would disagree with you. If you don't get an interview, it just means that wasn't the day for you to grab one. But going out there, putting your foot out and putting out feelers, putting in the work, filling out the applications. I'm getting stressed out just thinking about that. It's like my least favorite possible activity is putting together job applications. So like, give yourself a pat on the back every time you finish that, because that's a win. And it's a big project. It's stressful. It's debilitating in a lot of ways when you see so much rejection, but give yourself the wins where you can. Don't beat yourself up so much about it. You're a stud. And I'm not just talking about you, but anyone that's in a job search right now. Real quick, let's transition just directly into the mental health side, because I love the nutritional side of it. You have a pretty tenured career so far in fantasy, you also have worked in other areas in sports. And um, just in your experience, we have a question in here that's talking about the fantasy sports community, but I want to parlay it to both the sports industry as a whole and the changes that have happened over the last decade. What have you noticed, and how supportive has the fantasy community, but also the sports media industry been when discussing and handling mental health issues?
So I think the fantasy sports industry is actually a lot more supportive. Just from my experience, I'm not going to say it's definitely more supportive for everyone out there. I know everyone has their own takes on this. My take, as someone that worked in professional sports, I worked in baseball for two different professional baseball teams, the San Diego Padres, the Detroit Tigers. I did that for 2 years of my life on the analytics side. And I've been in the fantasy sports industry in some form the past 4 years in a full-time capacity. And I'd say that the community is really supportive in DMs with podcast guest appearances. The people that I just will casually message with and check in with occasionally, or they check in with me, or we'll hop on quick phone calls where we'll guest on each other's shows, and then we'll shoot the shit after the show and discuss stuff. I find that those interactions were a lot harder to find in sports. I have some good friends from my time in the sports industry that was like the real pro sports industry. So it's not any bashing any of my former coworkers in that sense. I actually have made some really good friends doing that. But I'd say overall, if we look at the general sports media landscape or like front office landscape compared to fantasy, I think fantasy is a little bit better in terms of the people that are actually working in it. We'll talk about the trolls and whatnot shortly. Obviously, when you're doing public work, you're opening yourself up to other avenues of anger and frustration from people. But
Right.
I think what's good about the fantasy community or this industry is that the type of people that are attracted to generally remote work, weird hours, a lot of creative thinking. People have very diverse backgrounds. They're often in people like me where they're like the 9-to-5 job. When I was coming out of grad school, it felt like that type of career would hold me back for what I was looking for and for my skill set. I've kind of changed my stance on that now that I'm 30, and I'm now very, very different than I was when I'm like a 23, 24-year-old who just doesn't have the work experience and is essentially just like, oh, like it's time to spread my wings, let me fly.
Right.
So my feelings on the 9-to-5 waffle, and I'm definitely more positive towards the 9-to-5 than I used to be. But I think that a lot of people just found like that wasn't quite the lifestyle for them. And then everyone has these kind of interesting stories behind what made them get into this. It usually isn't like, oh yeah, my 9-to-5 was awesome. I loved everything about my current situation, which is why I hard pivoted to the fantasy industry. It's usually something was missing, and this was kind of filling that space. I think it just in general, I think you'd really agree for how much of a male-dominated industry this is, for how much fantasy specifically focuses on fantasy football, a tackle sport, male-dominated industry. The fantasy community is not very macho.
Yeah, it's true.
I talk with my girlfriend about this sometimes. She always jokes that I'm like the most macho man and the least macho man at the same time.
I would go with the latter.
She's like, you work out every day. You work in football. You podcast, which is like so many guys' wet dream job is podcast. But then also like you go to therapy, and a lot of the work you do is like straight up just stats and analytics and spreadsheets, and it's not actually like quote unquote cool. So it's very funny how you're doing like the complete mix of the coolest stuff ever and some of the least cool things ever.
I don't disagree with that stance on the fantasy industry. It's a hobbyist industry, and it also, there's a disconnect in a lot of ways between like professional athletes and the fantasy space. We're getting closer together, but maybe with the NFL, I don't know. It's complicated. Things got weird last year with the NFL and betting and all of that. But the fantasy industry itself, like people face a lot of scrutiny, whether you're in actual sports media or you're just in online social media or you're doing fantasy sports or actual sports journalism. you hit it on the head. You put yourself out there on the internet, and you're going to deal with a lot of toxicity, no matter who you are. So how do you go about managing like the public scrutiny, the online toxicity, and the stress that comes with those expectations?
Yeah, I think I have a pretty good exercise that's going to be actionable for anyone listening who struggles
Excellent.
with trolls. So this used to really bother me. I mean, let's be honest. Who's not going to be bothered initially when people are mean? It's natural to be affected. I joined Twitter I guess I joined fantasy Twitter in around May 2020. I think I had like 30 followers. I really I'd been posting on Twitter very occasionally for a couple of years. Nobody read my tweets. I didn't want anyone to read my tweets. I did not have a big social media presence on any platform. I never wanted to. So me kind of stumbling into this influencer position with
Mm,
Twitter, I wouldn't say I really had the natural personality for it. I was not kind of ready for it. So trolls affected me a lot early on. And here's the
mm,
actionable part, because here's why they no longer affect me. Some people are like, how do you sometimes engage with the trolls with a straight face and speak so kindly to them, like I often do, and genuinely mean it and not get frustrated? And it's because I pity the trolls. Ronnie, I pity the trolls. Free time is so precious. I love my free time. I treasure my free time. The last thing I could ever imagine doing during my free time is going on the internet and anonymously trying to assassinate someone's character or tear them down or whatnot. So I think about how many other things in my life are better than that I like to do. There's a lot. I like to cook. I like to work out, take walks in the park, just drive to the mountains and just look at nature. I like to play chess. I mean, there's so many things out there, like grab a drink with friends, watch
yeah.
some sports with friends. Like it just goes on and on and on as to how many things exist in the world that I would rather do than anonymously dunk on people. And that is why I just pity Ronnie. I pity the trolls. I don't mind going back and forth with them. I feel bad for them. I am in a much better life position than they are, at least when you measure it in terms of how I spend my free time. And I think once you start to think about it that way, it immediately just like takes off the frustration of like, oh, that feedback. I love taking in feedback from people who matter. Does a troll who wants to spend their free time pooping on me matter?
Right.
No. And that's why at this point, maybe I'm wrong, and like there's gonna be some troll comment that comes out soon that really affects me. People are pretty mean sometimes, but it really just doesn't affect me. My close friends or family, if they were to say stuff like that, it would definitely affect me
Oh,
because
of
I care
course.
about them and their opinion matters. The trolls, the opinion simply doesn't matter at this point.
You have a really interesting approach with them too. I always enjoy like the times that you do choose to interact. You have it's almost like a sport in some ways. Do you ever find yourself like my move is to kill them with kindness? If I do interact, I always am just like, hey, sorry you feel that way.
Mhm.
I hope everything's going well in your life. Like just like flip it back on them. But oftentimes the best move for people is just to ignore it. And I'm not suggesting people spend time exercising,
Oh yeah. I
interacting with it.
wouldn't recommend anyone do my methods unless they want to.
Yeah.
I think the actionable part is think about how many things you'd rather do with your free time than troll people. Your life's probably better. They're definitely missing something in their life. So if that works for you, just ignore it and move on. If you want to engage, then I would say I have a long track record of some very funny interactions with these trolling members of society.
For sure, for sure. I've seen a lot of them. Well, and you're talking about like all the things that you like to do that you would rather do than trolling. For me, I and a lot of people, we struggle with balancing the things that we like to do versus the things that we have to do. And in the fantasy space and journalism and sports journalism, there is an element of like work-life balance that can be tricky for people. So a question on that front, like what strategies do you employ to maintain a balance between your career, your personal life, especially given like the constant updates and changes in player stats, dynamics, and
Mhm.
the ever-flowing nature of this industry?
Yeah, when I first started, it definitely took over my life. Uh, I was in a very long-term relationship that started kind of halfway through college. It ended 2 years ago. And fortunately, like, it was a mutual breakup. I still care about her a lot. We're still friendly.
That's
We
good.
like it was people are surprised that we were able to have such an amicable breakup. I think that's I don't know. I don't have too much advice on that. I think we both got lucky. I'm
Yeah.
not quite sure. But anyway, that relationship ended, and a decent chunk of it was because we didn't spend much time together because I was working 80 or more hours each week.
Hmm.
And she hated football by the end of it. I don't blame her. It took over my life. There were other reasons our relationship ended. I think ultimately it's much better for both of us. I'm sure she would agree that we're not together. And I don't want to say like it was purely because of my job, because it wasn't. There were other factors, but that was definitely a big one. Was when you're working on weekends, when you're working late at night, and you're dating someone who has a 9 to 5, you have no free time overlap. And I really just let it took over completely. I didn't hang out with many friends either for 2 years or so. Most of my friendships were the online ones with podcasting. And I let a lot of the in-person friendships I had kind of slip to the side, where I didn't see them very often because of how much I worked. It was not just like, oh, like girls to the side. It was kind of like everything had to go to the side, since you simply don't have enough hours in the week to sleep and do all that work. What I've done the last year and a half or so is just being purposeful about which times are actually flexible and which ones aren't.
Mm.
So a time that is not flexible, you cannot be flexible on Tuesdays. If you want to work in this industry, you have
Yeah.
to be a fucking workhorse on Tuesdays.
That's a great
Tuesdays,
point.
I'd have my fantasy rankings come out. I do my waiver wire. There is so much that happens on Tuesday. If you, for some reason out there, are like, I want Tuesdays off, this fantasy football specifically is not for you. You should not work
Right.
in the industry. Your Tuesdays are going to be freaking awful.
Well,
But
Tuesday, and even if you don't work in the industry, sorry to cut in, but like if you're just
Mhm.
playing fantasy, Tuesdays are busy days. It's kind
Yeah,
of
that's a good
it's the
point. Yeah.
Sunday of the fantasy football. The week starts on Wednesday, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. You simply, with waiver wires and stuff, with all the games on Sunday, with Monday Night Football, it just so happens Tuesday is
Yeah.
brutal in terms of the commitment. That's just how it is. I've accepted that. But what I've done the past 2 years is I take Wednesday morning through early afternoon off during the season. So that might be
Hmm.
sleeping in, that might be getting up early and then snowboarding if it's winter, or doing a hike,
Hmm.
or whatever it might be, or going out to brunch, whatever it is. I try not to start work until 1, 2, 3 p.m. on Wednesday. I don't mind working that night, but I try to take off that actual 5, 6, 7 hours during the day. And that's generally worked out pretty well in terms of, I don't think anyone knew that I was doing that outside of my coworkers. I'd be shocked if people knew that I wasn't working on Wednesdays. And it's because that's actually a time that can be flexible. Thursday, Friday, you got the player prop betting and stuff, things like that. So that's like a clear non-negotiable of like, you got to do stuff then, just like you got to do stuff on Tuesdays. I found out Wednesdays were a good time to take off. Saturdays, I would mostly take off recently, the past 2 seasons, because really you're reacting to Sunday morning news. That's when it's important. There's not much anyone can do on Saturday. Being first with your projections or whatever, or changing your rankings, maybe that gives you a marginal edge, but it's a marginal edge.
Yeah.
People really want you to be attentive Sunday. I'm happy to wake up early on Sunday, answer start sits, update projections, rankings, whatever it might be. But part of why I'm rejuvenated and able to do that and enjoy it is not doing much on Saturdays. So it took a while to get to a point where I was comfortable doing that. But Wednesday, Saturday, I started to realize those were sort of the 2 flexible days, and that, yeah, you might not get your true weekend, but you can still find pockets of those days to take off.
I think that's really good advice. It goes back to what a couple of the previous guests brought up too, just in general mental health management. Got to set like strict boundaries for your
Yeah.
time, and you have to be concrete about them. It's something I actually really, really struggle with. And I know on days where I do follow a set schedule and things are regimented for me, I'm much happier. And the days where, like this morning, as an example, I really struggled with sleep last night. I texted you about it, was up until 4 in the
Yeah.
morning, just sitting in bed. My mind was racing. And then I got up at 8 and was tanked and had plans to get ready for the show, yada, yada, yada. Long story short, my entire morning leading up to recording with you was kind of all over the place. And it wasn't until I sat down and talked to you and started doing this episode that I started to feel energy come back in me and feel like a semblance of normalcy back in my life. So having structure for time and sticking to it is really a big cheat code for managing mental health, but also for professional careers. Excuse me, professional careers, like you just alluded to. It's very important. It's really the only way to stay successful and consistent. So I love that. That's really, really good advice. I want to move into mental health stigma a little bit. Before I do, though, do you have any other thoughts on everything we just talked about?
No, let's keep trucking through, Ronnie.
Okay.
Let's
So-
just like a steam engine. We just keep going.
I love it. I love it. So we haven't talked yet about your trying to make a choo-choo train analogy. I'm not going to. We haven't talked about your mental health engines, if we will yet. And I want you, whatever you're comfortable with sharing about your backstory with mental health, lead with that, and then talk a little bit about how you address and combat like the stigma around mental health within the sports media industry and fantasy sports industry.
Yeah, I'd say the mental health journey, because I was a very happy kid. I was a very curious, energetic kid. I definitely had some anxiety, but overall, I think my parents would describe me as the most energetic kid they ever experienced. I was a terror to parents because I just never stopped moving. Anyone who knows me like in person is always like, I wouldn't say I'm the most like socially loud person. I'm not the most extroverted person or anything like that. But in terms of pure energy, I just have so much pure energy. And I generally have been a very curious, happy person, or at least I was growing up. I went to a smaller middle school, and then I went to a big public high school, and I was bullied. I couldn't make friends. I really struggled to kind of find my community in high school. My middle school was very much based around academics, and people seemed to like if you were smart or tried to be smart or put in effort in school. And when I got to the big public high school, I was actually kind of surprised that it was pretty cool to slack off, to not do work. And I found that was very at odds with what I like to do. I like to put in a lot of effort. I have a lot of energy. I enjoy learning. I enjoy school. And very quickly, I realized that was shut down and kind of mentally beaten out of me in terms of, no. That's not how you should be. And I think that's kind of where stuff began to spiral. I transferred high schools. I ended up becoming just like the way that like an old therapist of mine put it is like, I became the person that couldn't be bullied. Like I tried my hardest rather than being myself, just to be someone where like I was very cold. I was stoic. There was just like, there were no holes to poke. I was just kind of there existing.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to give anyone kind of like that ammunition. And it ended up leading me towards a lot of bad stuff. I ended up going to one of those boarding schools that's now shut down, where it's like a lockdown facility, and they really force you to focus on like mental health therapy, self-awareness, learning who you are, trying to recognize that like your personality and who you truly are is important. It's worth it. And how to like combat addiction. Just
it is worth it. Sorry, I just want to say that.
Yeah. All things like that. So that was a huge turning point in my life, was realizing that who I am as a person is the best version of me. And I've tried to really take that with me since then. And obviously it's not like it. Mental health is a lifelong thing that you have to focus on. You can't just be like, oh yeah, like I was depressed like 6 years ago.
And now I'm done. Like,
yeah. So like, I wouldn't say that I'm currently like full on depressed. I definitely have days where I'm heavily depressed. I have days where I'm much more positive towards my situation. We'll talk about the situation with employment shortly. But one thing that I've learned in this industry in terms of the stigma is, because I have this job that a lot of people think's pretty interesting and desirable in some way, working in fantasy football, working in betting, having worked for 2 sports teams, a lot of people look up to that. And when I'm open now about my mental health struggles, there's definitely some people that just like shit on it. And they're just like, oh, that's weak.
Sure.
Men shouldn't cry. Men shouldn't show weakness. Men shouldn't ever talk about emotions. And you know what? Maybe we'll reach that community one day. For right now, they are not open to being helped. They are not
They're
open
shrinking
to change.
in numbers, though, especially in the fantasy.
They are definitely shrinking in numbers. Those people, I don't really have anything to combat them with or to say, other than like, well, I'm pretty happy with who I am as a person. So like, sorry for offending you that I care about my
Can
own
can I
emotions.
throw in one thing real quick? I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
interrupted you again. This is what I would say to those people.
Yeah,
You're
let me
not
hear
a
it.
gorilla, so stop pretending you are. Be a human being. We all have ups and
Yeah.
downs.
I like that. We're human beings. So I found that people are often surprised that I go to therapy, or they're inspired that I admit that I go to therapy and stuff like that, that I have mental health struggles throughout my life. So that's kind of where I'm at right now in terms of this. Is a lot of people are either like, oh, wow, you have a cool job. You have a lot of followers. I didn't think you could be sad ever. I didn't think you could be
Right.
anxious ever. And then there's the people that are like, because you have this platform, it's very cool that you do this. I get so many DMs from people that are like, wow, like I started going to therapy because I saw that you went.
I
And I'm
love
just kind of
that.
like, I don't think like I
Love that.
deserve that. I don't necessarily want to or feel like I am like that figurehead of change. I think of myself on such a smaller scale. But if someone's ever going to think of me like that, I'm not going to turn that down. I'll be like, cool. If you're making a positive change in your life in some way because of me, I'm not going to say no to that. So I don't really feel like I'm this like pillar or beacon of hope or change or anything like that at all. But I do think it's cool that some people out there like that I talk about therapy. And to that, cool, go to therapy, try it out. I know it's expensive. There are definitely ways out there to make it less expensive. And if you truly don't want to do quote unquote therapy, just have a real conversation with a friend or an acquaintance in the fantasy community, whatever it might be. Ronnie and I at one point did not know each other. Part of how we started to know each other was through sharing about our struggles, about our lives, and bonding over. We can talk about mental health, and we also absolutely freaking devour fantasy football.
Yeah.
And you can have those interactions in the community. So like even someone within the community could be that. If you're like, I'm not ready for therapy or I can't afford it, hey, there are free things out there like these interactions within the community.
Let me plug something real quick on that note. So this is perfect. This little person right here putting this little party face on the screen. That's Toronto Dave. I brought it up every episode. If you
We
are
loved it.
playing, Dave is one of the staples of the entire fantasy industry, and we all love him to death. And he put together my favorite group. No offense to all the other groups I'm in, but my favorite group in the industry is Less Alone, and it's a group chat. About 75 people in it right now. It's all people within the fantasy football community sphere, not just employees, but just hobbyists and enthusiasts. And I go in there and share stuff all the time that I would never, ever share publicly. And I need that place. So if you are looking for that voice that Josh was alluding to, hit me up on Twitter, and I will get you in that group. And also on the note of therapy, I love this from Gary. You got to put in the effort. He's saying that you put in the effort, but that's what counts. I'm parlaying it to advice for people. Like mental health does not change until you are willing to work on it and work on yourself. So I love all of that. You want to talk a little bit about the last few months here and kind of what you've been through and just the sports media industry and how volatile it is and the uncertainty and stress that comes with the ups and downs of job availability and all of that. I want to give you the floor and let you dictate how that part goes.
Yeah, I'd say for people that want even more of a backstory, I made a big post about it yesterday on Twitter.
That was awesome.
So thanks. So anyone out there that wants kind of like a more in-depth story or wants to kind of attach to more of the pieces of it, that post might be for you. I'm still figuring this part of my life out. I don't have the answers. What I try to remind myself is I can control two things. I can control my effort level and I can control like creativity. And some people might say like, you can't control creativity. There's writer's block. It's more so thinking about how stuff's been done in the past and then ways to improve it. I think that is creativity, and all of us can do that. We might not all have breakthroughs daily with that thought process, but that's kind of how I think about it is effort and creativity. I can control that. I don't have control over the rest. I don't have control over what happened with the 33rd team, the directions they chose to go in. I can't control any of that. So I'm kind of at a crossroads in terms of what to do. I think there's three options. Normal 9 to 5, where I do football work on the side. That's what I used to do when I worked in baseball. When I worked for the San Diego Padres as a business analyst, I was kind of consulting within the company. And for some reason, I was one of like 2, 3 people in the front office who didn't have game day responsibilities, which was pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Having come from the Tigers where I was on the baseball side and I literally never stopped working and stopped doing stuff at the stadium. So I was working like a true 40-hour work week when I was there. I was getting paid accordingly. The wages in pro sports are atrocious.
Yeah.
But fortunately, it was a 40-hour work week, so I was able to work for Player Profiler. I was able to do a lot of work and start to become entrenched in the industry that way. So I think that's an option for me. 9 to 5, hopefully one that pays a little bit better than what I used to have in sports. And then football work on the side, contributing to 1, 2, 3 companies. Then there's also trying to stay in football full time where I just latch onto a site like I have done with the 33rd team, like I did with FTN at one point, like I did with Player Profiler, and I just work for them full time exclusively. And then there's the freelance version where you get paid a little less initially, but I think it helps you kind of understand the right fits. Since I think fit is so important, if you're going to work a lot of hours, if you're going to interact a lot behind the scenes with these people in the industry, you might as well like the fit. So freelancing where I'm working for 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 companies, and I'm doing one, 2 pieces of content, behind the scenes work, whatever it might be each week. And that over time, I start to lobby the 1 or 2 companies I like best and fit in with best for more work. So that's kind of where I'm going with this. I don't have a clear plan of it, or I don't have like a clear path to the solution in terms of it's perfectly laid out. Like I'll have this interview here that will lead to this, which leads to this. Still working through that. I talk about in that Twitter post I made yesterday about how I actually turned down a job offer recently due to the mental health reasons and why I turned that down. So people, there were some like, and of course there were some mean comments out there that were like, oh, like you idiot. You like basically like stop bitching and playing the victim. You should have taken the job, man. Like, don't you know the job market? And it's like, okay, like you didn't really read the post. I'm not trying to look for sympathy. I'm just kind of laying out my thought process here.
You're
Obviously,
sharing. It's
like obvious. Yeah, like you could say I'm in a privileged position for getting a job and turning it down. But I also firmly believe that if I took that job, I wouldn't have lasted in that role for very long. And I don't think
really
that's, like you have to remember that.
I keep cutting you off. That is like that sort of self-awareness is big, and I would say that it goes back to your experience in high school and then everything that's happened since then. You've grown a lot of self-awareness. And as Dave and I talked about last night, like over time for people that struggle with mental health, as you work through therapy, you begin to pick up on your own limitations and have a more realistic view of like how you differ from other people and how to navigate society with your own little set of ingredients that's different than everyone else. And on the job searching front, just 2 notes. One thing for anyone that's watching right now that is in the fantasy football industry and has a job or is looking for one, it's a really tough industry to get employed in and to stay employed in. The margins are not as high as people expect at most websites, and there's like thousands of people that want to do the same job. There's a limited number of openings, and it's just super like year over year. The volatility is pretty crazy, and it's gotten worse over the last few years. Even just the first 5 months of this year, there's a lot, not just 33rd team. And so I think that we all need to stay focused on like mental health, because there's not a person on the planet that loses their job and doesn't have it impact their mental health for a little while. And I know you and I had talked privately when you were going through that initially, and it was some of what you echoed was that you're struggling, like you're having up and down days, not having the structure for you, and just like you have a system in place and then it's yanked away from you, and that is going to affect anyone. So keep an eye on people and stay supportive if you're in this industry. The volatility and I would say just the lack of true job security is a stressor that is often under talked about, I think, in the public light. And then lastly, I would add too that you've done a really good job when you were talking about what you're expecting. When people lose a job, often like the most helpful thing you can do initially is lay out the different options that your life can now take and different paths that you can go down, and then begin to consolidate and prioritize them and look for jobs that fit those categories. And it sounds like that's what you're doing. And it's exactly what I would recommend to anyone else that's in the middle of like an employment search right now. But those are taxing. So give yourself credit. You're staying on top of things. I'm super proud of you, man. I'm really happy to have you on here, and I think that you'll get the job. Keep turning down the ones until you find the thing. But let's move away from the job hunt real quick and go back into just fantasy football in general. A final note for you from your like personal experiences. I want to hear just like a personal story about a time when you or your mental health was significantly impacted by your career in sports media, and it cannot be the 33rd team that happened recently.
Yeah, so I haven't really talked about this story before. I feel like this is probably a good platform to discuss it. I'll change some names and other stuff. I don't really want people necessarily searching any of this. This is more just my like some events that happened. So as I mentioned earlier in the show, I had a very mutual, healthy breakup with someone I dated for many years, 2 years ago. And I moved to Denver and decided that it was time to be closer to nature. And I just kind of wanted to start fresh in a city that I'd actually tried to live in for many years. I'd been lobbying the person I'd been with at the time for many years. Let's move to Denver. It never quite worked out, but I'd always visited Denver often. I always enjoyed it. I wanted more hiking, more snowboarding. I love all the breweries here. I love the different sports teams here. There's so much good food here. People don't think of Denver as a food city, but because it's such a transplant city, you get so many young people that are chefs from all over the US moving to Denver. So there's just so many cool aspects to Denver. Anyway, as
Shout out Denver.
yeah. So as I'm trying to think of how to keep some of this nondescript, some of this in depth.
Take your
I
time.
didn't really plan any of this out, but
No worries.
when I was visiting Denver and apartment hunting, I came out here a few weeks before I was planning to move with my mom. She and I are very close. We checked out some apartments together. I wanted someone who knew me well and who I could trust to kind of outline like, or basically just look at how I was viewing the apartments, be like, yeah, like you seemed happier at this one, or I could really see you fitting into this one because of this and this, or have you thought about this? Do you enjoy this? So that was all very, very good. We're doing all that. I posted something that I posted what I thought was a pretty funny interaction from the airport when I was leaving Denver onto Twitter, and it went semi-viral. It was essentially someone at the airport flagged me or someone at the airport was surprised that I was putting a lunchbox through security, and it was just like a lunchbox. They were like, "Why did you take a lunchbox out of your bag? You can keep your lunchbox in there." And I was like, there's a microphone in there. And someone at the airport who works in TSA became very flirtatious with me it seemed like on the off chance that I was like some famous singer, basically broke the news as to what I actually do. And she was very turned off by that interaction.
I'm sorry.
Fantasy football and betting podcast isn't quite like, yeah, I'm an up and coming, like semi-famous singer with 1 million Spotify listeners a month. I think like that's what she was hoping for. So when she got like the reality of the situation, like the hand came off my shoulder, very, very uninterested. So I posted this interaction and ended up getting a DM on Twitter from this girl that I thought was cute. She seemed like a real person. She thought the story was funny, and she was like, "I think what you do sounds pretty cool." So immediately, like me fresh off a breakup, I'm like, well, let's respond.
Yes.
We ended up chatting for a few weeks. She lived about an hour plane ride away at the time from Denver. So the week before the 2022 NFL season, fresh off a nice little bonus payday from the 33rd team, since they were paying me pretty well at the time, I was like, I'm going to fly this girl out to Denver. This is one of the craziest things I've done. This is so cool. Flew her out. We ended up really hitting it off in person. We spent a few days together exploring Denver when I initially moved out. And there's a lot of entanglement with, I don't fully know exactly what happened. I will never know exactly what happened, but basically we posted a couple things on social media, kind of like, oh, like how funny is this? that like it's all started on Twitter. And now here we are hanging out in person. This is so cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
The story got picked up by Bleacher Report. They posted it on a lot of their socials. We just kind of were like, wow, that's pretty cool. We don't really have like too much of a strong take on that other than like, that's kind of fun. We weren't really doing it for like clout or anything. We just kind of thought it was funny, honestly. Like for everyone out there that's wondering like what state of mind we were in when we posted anything, we were drunk at a wine bar, having a great night, and threw up a picture on social media.
Yeah.
It had like, it was not like this planned, like, all right, here's the intricate plan of how we get famous. I wasn't trying to go viral. I wasn't trying to be famous. There was like literally nothing there. I just thought it was kind of cool. I thought it was funny. And I was drunk at a wine bar, folks.
Sure.
The week before the season. You're supposed to let loose and have a little fun the week before the season because you can't really take days off during the NFL season. Outside of like how I take off like a little bit of a Wednesday, a little bit of a Saturday. Anyway, I'm having a good time. Bleacher Report picks the story up. Ultimately, that opened us up to an audience we weren't expecting. She ended up getting her identity leaked. She got ferociously bullied because she had, quote unquote, made the first move by reaching out to me, and she's a woman and women can't make the first move. She was also, some people were like, you're so easy. I don't know. Some people thought she was a prostitute. None of it really makes sense. She's a good person. She's a nice person. She and I do not talk anymore. We do not interact. From what I've gathered, she's doing well again, which is nice, but the police had to get involved. There were like,
Crazy.
It was incredibly serious. I thought I might have ruined her life at one point through this post. And there was a lot of like, it was almost like survivor's guilt where I was kind of like, how am I not getting backlash, but she is, when like we mutually wanted to post this. And it was also like a mutual hangout and mutual weekend spent together. It wasn't like one of us was pushing for it and the other was like, oh no, like, oh, I don't know. Everything was very mutual. Unfortunately, because there's clearly a lot of sexism still in the sports industry.
Yes.
At least in some pockets of it. She was ferociously bullied. The police got involved. Her life was in danger at different points because of how crazy a lot of internet people are and how some guys out there almost think they deserve to be with certain women. And some guys out there decided they deserved to have my story too. And I was kind of like, sorry, folks, like next time bring a lunchbox to airport security. So I'm still like, I'll never know fully what happened. She won't tell me fully exactly what happened. I only know like chunks of the story, but like I have some theories about it. I'll never quite know, but there was like a future Hall of Fame NFL player involved that like wished she had spent that weekend with him instead of with me. So like we had suspicions that like he was partially responsible for like trying to send some people after her. We will never fully know. I especially will never fully know since she and I don't talk anymore. But it was a situation where I reached out to a lot of people at the time and wanted to quit the industry. And it was like, I hate how this is what social media has become. I am just a wreck. I can't believe I ruined this person's life. So I nearly quit the 33rd team job a few months in because of that. Joe Banner is an amazing person, he was an amazing boss, just an amazing mentor figure for me. He helped me out a lot. And even he, with all of his years in the public light, was like, I've never heard or seen anything like this happening. So he couldn't really be like, here's how to deal with it. Here's exactly how to handle it. But I would say that the reason I'm still in the industry is honestly because of him. He was so supportive that I needed to not fully step away from work, but basically like take a few weeks off social media at the start of the 2022 NFL season, which is like the worst time to get off social media when you work in the industry. So he was honestly the reason that I didn't quit, that I stayed with it. So I'll always just be really thankful to him for that crazy situation. But
I have nothing. I have no response. That's crazy. I mean, it's like, that's so far beyond a typical, like, the internet sucks story. Let me just parlay it into this way. For me, I was not just thinking about quitting the fantasy industry, but I was thinking about quitting life, like in general, a lot over the last few years. And having, for you, Joe Banner, for me, like having people like you and Dave Kluge and Andrew Cooper, and I mentioned the three of you guys a lot, but people that matter, that are busy, that don't have a lot of time, that were willing to just take 10 minutes out of their day to hear me out here and there over the couple years, like that kept me afloat, genuinely. I know I've told you that a million times, but it's important for people to hear that, like, small gestures and just being open and having your ear available when somebody is going through something can often just be all the difference in the world. Even if you don't have the right advice, just like it sounds like Joe didn't have perfect advice on handle the situation, but he was there for you and he was
Yeah.
listening and understanding. And that's really, really all that it takes to help somebody change a bad day from a good day a lot of times. So I love that story. We're at 45 minutes, and I know we said let's keep it close to 30, but I want to close out with a mental health note for people in fantasy football and just a bit of strategy that could help your mentals as the season goes on. There is a player, and we're going to do fantasy football talk for just a few minutes, and then we'll close this thing out.
We have to talk about your guy.
So just a backstory here. Josh knows it, but I'm a Tennessee Vols fan, and I am like the harshest critic of Tennessee players. When it comes to fantasy, I usually recommend people don't draft them. Did it for Hyatt last year. Joe Milton this year is my guy on that front. Stay away. But Jaylen Wright, been posting about him on Twitter for about 2 years now, and always hoped that he would show up at the combine. He did for the most part. He stumbled during his 40 time. I still say his real 40 is about a half second faster than what he was clocked for. But Jaylen Wright, we talked about him beforehand, and there's a couple reasons why I think right now he represents just an astronomically high upside value proposition in dynasty drafts, and even potentially as a back of the draft player right now in redraft leagues to stash. So give me your thoughts on Jaylen and why he could be like a dose of positive mental health for people that are looking for value adds in their fantasy football space. It's a loose
Yeah.
comparison.
Very, very loose. So I think the tie-in here is that with a lot of mental health stuff, it involves anxiety and how to deal with that, how to lean into uncertainty. You need to lean into uncertainty with Jaylen Wright. It can make you feel a little anxious to want a guy on your fantasy football dynasty team, redraft team, whatever it might be, who was taken in the 4th round of the NFL draft, which isn't good, and is 3rd on his team's depth chart. He's not even a quote unquote direct handcuff. Here's why I like Jaylen Wright. So fast, decent size, some pass catching ability. Those are all things that lead to fantasy points. He has a profile of a guy that can score fantasy points. He's on the Miami Dolphins team, which has shown that fast running backs can succeed in a huge way for fantasy football. And then if we look ahead of him on the depth chart, Raheem Mostert's 32. Coming off of by far the biggest workload of his career. He has a massive injury history. I'd be shocked if Raheem Mostert, after years and years of getting banged up, suddenly plays age 31 and age 32 with pretty much perfect health. That's probably not going to happen. For his sake, I hope it does. It's unlikely to. Devon Achane, he weighed in around like 190 before the season began. I've heard he's putting on pounds. He's getting bigger. A lot of guys say that maybe he's getting up to like 195. Maybe he's even getting close to 200. But ultimately, Achane is a very, very small, speedy running back. He also dealt with injury issues throughout last season. Suddenly, we have 32-year-old with injury issues, tiny, young running back with injury issues, and then Jaylen Wright. Not that Jaylen Wright can't get injured himself, but just the idea that he is so buried on this depth chart. It would not surprise me if Mostert got hurt in training camp, if Achane sprains an ankle in week 1 or week 2, and suddenly Jaylen Wright has a ton of touches. This is a very, very plausible situation. I would actually be pretty shocked if Jaylen Wright doesn't have at least 100 carries this year. That's not going to get it done for fantasy necessarily, but it's the idea that, like, yes, just because he's 3rd doesn't mean he won't actually be doing a lot on the football field for the Dolphins this year. He's someone that I've been targeting in my rookie drafts in the mid to late 2nd round. I think that's a great place for him. So I think we're pretty aligned there that Jaylen Wright is actually in a really, really good position to score fantasy points.
I love it. Well, and I told people before the draft privately, not on Twitter. I was like, multiple people, like, I hope he either goes to the 49ers or to the Dolphins, because those schemes create highways for the running back to run through. And then all you need is a guy that can make one cut and hit 20 miles an hour within 5 seconds. That's Jaylen Wright. He is a very, very special running back when it comes to size, speed, acceleration, and he got to the perfect landing spot. You laid out the roadmap for him in Dynasty. It's pretty much, when is Raheem Mostert out of the picture? I think that's next year. And this year, He'll get his times. My prediction for Jaylen is that he is going to immediately jump in value the first time he scores a 60-yard touchdown, and I bet you he gets one this year.
Mm-hmm.
I also think Mostert and Chan will get a 60-yard touchdown this year. They're all going to get theirs, but Jaylen will get his. And a fun side note for Jaylen, he's the fastest player in this draft. Not 40 time. 40 times are wildly overrepresented in fantasy football analysis. In terms of top-end speed, he was the fastest clock player in college football last year. He also has the fastest 15-yard or the highest speed at 15 yards in the combine of a running back I think that they've ever measured. So he's a burner. And he is. Toronto Dave just added in Raheem Mostert. Jaylen Wright is literally a Raheem Mostert clone with a little bit more juice on the vertical side. So it's perfect. I love it. Going back to mental health, I think if you draft Jaylen Wright and he doesn't work out, don't let it affect your mental health. Don't be mean to us either. We have mental health issues. We're just trying to help.
Just doing our best.
Yeah. So anything else, Josh, before we wrap this thing up and go grab some lunch?
No, I think we covered it. We talked mental health. We talked Jaylen Wright. I don't know what more needs to be said there. You and I will always be in touch, but this was good. It was a nice change of pace from the usual guest appearance in this industry. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you for coming on. Thanks again to all the other guests. Over the next few days, I've got Trash Sandwiches and Carla, a couple other people, and then we're closing out with some pretty big names as well at the end of the month. So again, we're about a third of the way through the Judgment Seesaw. This is 30 streams in 30 days talking about mental health with people in the fantasy industry. Again, this is Josh Larky, one of the best people in fantasy football. And I'm not saying that because he's on the screen with me. He has proven that to me on a personal level time and time again. Follow him. It's at Larky Tweets. Follow his journey. We'll see where he ends up a year from now. I imagine that we're going to be saying Josh Larky from X, Y, and Z company that is not currently in the picture. And I'm excited to see what that ends up being. Josh, thank you. And to everyone else, smash that subscribe button. Here's a video.
What's going on between my ears?
Everyone seems to be so clear.
But I'm feeling foggy. My mind is awash. Let's talk about it.